Don't mind me rambling on a little bit about nitrogen. It was just, we're going to talk about nitrogen a bit today because that's one of the issues in this uprising in Europe, the farmer rebellion. And hearing Geert Wilders mention nitrogen so casually, it would be like if someone suddenly out of the blue said, we've got to do something about all this hydrogen. You'd say, what, are you crazy? Yes, it is a madness. Mark, tell us what's going on in Europe. We see images of farmers protesting in the most creative ways, dumping manure on politicians' buildings. Give us an update. What's going on with the farmers' protests in Belgium, especially? It gives me some vibes of the Canadian trucker protest.
It does. That's the first thing I was going to say, Ezra, is Europeans probably wake up every day and thank God that Justin Trudeau isn't their leader, because right now they would be declared domestic terrorists under a first ever invoked Emergencies Act in Europe, and they would be facing not having access to their own money, having their insurance canceled. So the good news is Justin Trudeau's not there to crack down on them. That's the first point I wanted to make. But it's absolutely amazing what is happening. What's happening in Europe right now with this farmer rebellion is what I wish had happened back in March and April of 2020 with the general public against the public health tyranny that was COVID and lockdowns and stay at home and social distancing and cancellation of weddings, funerals. The farmers aren't taking it anymore. And what they're not taking is the net zero agenda that was born out of the 1992 Rio Earth Summit, and then, of course, moved forward all the way to the UN Paris Agreement. And the idea here is, and in many of these countries, it's not even the politicians go and agree to these UN climate summits, but then they become law at home and the courts order the farmers to start reducing emissions. And what happens is these are climate compliance costs, meaning small family-run generational farms can't afford the cost to absorb all of these costs and new ways and new technology that's supposed to capture the nitrogen. And what ends up happening is they're facing extinction. The big boys come in, the billionaire, the equity asset, the big agribusiness, corporate, which is exactly what the forces of the United Nations, World Economic Forum want, because they can control them. And this is what happened in the Netherlands. They were facing 10,000 small, medium, family-run farms for generations being shut down. The farmers in the Netherlands fought back, and I think the farmers, the rest of Europe, watched what happened. The farmers in the Netherlands formed their own political party, the BBB. They're now a governing coalition, and they're stopping the net zero madness. So in Belgium, in France, in Poland, in Spain, in Sweden, at the headquarters of the EU in Brussels, they are letting it be known that they are not going to allow the net zero agenda to shut them down. And by the way, now the second part of your question is nitrogen. It's insane. And they're trying to move nitrogen on the same pedestal as they put CO2
nitrogen
as
is
they're
what,
worshiping warming
it's like
agent.
78% of error. So I forget my high school chemistry. It's like more than 70% of air is nitrogen. Am I right on that? Like it's crazy.
I don't have. Yeah,
like it's the most common gas, and it's one of the lowest number elements. It's one of the most common elements, like carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen and hydrogen. That's half of the stuff. Like that's,
and you might as well go after H2O and go after water, go after oxygen.
Yeah.
Okay. So what happened with nitrogen is, they've demonized two things that deal with food production: nitrogen, which is used for fertilizer. Now, Norman Borlaug won the Nobel Peace Prize for his invention of the golden rice, and part of this whole green revolution in agriculture was based on high yield fertilizers, of which nitrogen is one. The problem is, well, I shouldn't say the problem is, but the catch is for the climate activists is it produces nitrous oxide, which is a greenhouse gas. And this is what they're focusing on as a way to go after our food supply. And they have a two-pronged attack. Don't forget about methane. They're going after the fertilizer, which produces the high yield agriculture and has fed the world for the last 50, 60 years. And they're going after methane, which is animal agriculture and meat eating. That's the key thing. And so John Kerry just announced last summer in 2023 that the U.S. agriculture is now going to have to fall under the net zero. In other words, a direct attack on nitrogen and methane. And it's so insane with nitrogen that the Scientific American last year in 2023, Ezra, had an article about how human pee is a pollution problem. And you might say, well, what are they talking about? Humans are eating too much meat, which is then coming out in our urine as nitrous oxide, which is then causing global
Oh
warming.
my
That's
God.
how insane this whole movement has become. So they want to roll methane, nitrogen, and carbon dioxide into one bundle so that they can come after us and literally shut down. It's not that they want to shut down all of modern civilization. They want to gain the levers of control and get rid of all the small, independent, and just like in COVID, how they crush the small businesses, the mom and pops, they want that corporate control because then you have corporate government collusion and you can set global policy instantly.
You're so right. And I'm just thinking, I do remember from my high school chemistry, methane is CH4. It's such a building block molecule. It's so common. Methane is naturally occurring. And imagine declaring war on that. It would be like declaring, almost like declaring war on water, as you said. It's madness.
But it's actually a study, and it was, I believe, in England, the journal PLOS in December 2023, 2 months ago. Human breath contributes to global warming. This is a peer-reviewed study. Africans warm the air with their breath more than Asians, and women warm the air with their breath more than men. So it's a war against humans as well as industrial activity.
You know, it's absolutely crazy. And I'm glad that the farmers of Europe are standing up. Listen, farmers have been rebelling in one way or another in Europe for a long time, and there's sometimes a hodgepodge of ideas afoot. I understood why the truckers revolted in Canada 2 years ago. It was crystal clear what the crisis was. And because we were on the scene, we could understand it. There's a bit of a language barrier sometimes with the European farmers. And I know one of the issues is, for example, dumping of cheap Ukrainian grain in Europe to help Ukraine. And so there are some different issues afoot there. But I tell you, the last 5 years, watching the World Economic Forum, watching the war on carbon and watching the war on nitrogen, the war on farmers, the war on food, the war on fuel, even though there are some unanswered questions for me about who these farmers are and what they're fighting for, my instincts are to side with them because I know the guys on the other side are the bad guys, Mark.